This is James Cook of the University of Maine at Augusta, and I'm shooting this video as we begin our academic year with a theme for this academic year at the University of Maine at Augusta of truth. Truth is something that we seek after, and when we seek after it, we attach a verb to that. We don't simply say we hold the truth, we say we know it. And knowledge is the state of knowing something is true. With that in mind, the academic theme book of the year is Jennifer Nagle's Knowledge, a very short introduction, mostly short because it has very small text, and it contains a lot of ideas. The ideas in this book are meant to encompass many ways of attempting to gain knowledge about the truth that we see around us in the natural sciences, the humanities, and the social sciences. Now, criminology is firmly embedded in the social sciences, and so as one of the social sciences, it attempts to combine traditions of empiricism and rationality. Empiricism is the act of observation, and rationality is the use of very specific ways of thinking in order to understand ideas and to be able to systematically approach consideration. You don't have to have the two of them together, but when you do, what you get is a very systematic approach to looking at the world, sensing the world, collecting those sensations, and thinking about them to understand what is knowable. This has to do with the subject of crime and criminology when we start to think about questions we ask about the world. One of the questions we ask about the world is, how might we diminish criminality? Now, there's an alternative approach to truth, which is one of intuition, or what might be said common sense. I'd like to argue in this semester against common sense, because often once we start to take a look at ideas like criminality, we begin to understand they're really complicated and not at all obvious. For instance, when we're talking about reducing criminality, what would we observe? What would we look at to see that criminality is reduced? To understand that question, we have to understand what criminality is. We have to define it. How would you know it when you see it? Is criminality something to be seen in what? What do we look at even? Do we look at a community? Does a community possess criminality? Does a family possess criminality? Does an individual possess criminality? Does a place possess criminality? Once you've figured that out, you also need to then figure out across time, is criminality something that is stable, or is it something that changes? Is criminality something that is due to a characteristic of a person or a characteristic of a community, or is it something that happens to them from the outside? Where does criminality come from? Who decides? These are the core questions for a social scientist. And in order to answer them, you have to come up with a very specific definition. Now, the key for any of these definitions, and we'll find that there are different ways of defining them across time in the social sciences, is that they must possess measurability and consistency. So consistency means that you can look at any situation and use the same definition. Measurability means that you can tell someone else how to find that criminality, and they will be able to do the same thing. When you bring those two together, you get what's called operationalization, which is the ability to go out and operate in the field, to go out and look and find criminality, and to have two people look at the same object, whether it's a community or a person or a family, and find the same levels of criminality. Because if we can't agree on that basic observation, how can we ever claim to know? How can we ever claim claim to have a purchase on the truth.